So we are ready to baste our quilt. Here is my backing. It's pieced backing. I've spray sized it. All of my seams are pressed open. I'm going to try and find a large table to lay down the entire quilt top. And then I'm going to stick it down with a tape that's not going to leave any residue. Normally, I use a blue painter's tape, but we're in the studio and they have gaffer's tape, so this is not going to leave any residue on my quilt. Then I'm going to use my 505 basting spray. This is my favorite brand of basting spray. It doesn't gum up my needle, and it's going to help to hold the layers together. So when you're spraying it on, you're not spraying too much. That's really the trick, and you're going to be spraying toward the center of the quilt. For this next step, my friend Michelle is going to help me. It's always helpful when you're basting a quilt to have a friend to help. So we're going to take our batting, and we're going to bring it over the quilt, and we're going to lay the quilt onto the quilt backing. Now, keep in mind that a lot of people like to fluff their battings first in the dryer, which is a great idea. It'll get some of those wrinkles out, but this is going to be just fine. I'm going to lay it out and smooth it into place. Get any of those big creases out. Then I'm going to use some of the spray baste again and put just again another little layer of spray baste on top of the batting. Now Michelle and I are going to put the quilt top down. This is the most important part of the basting steps because you need to keep the straight edges of the quilt straight. So having a friend to help you is going to make a big difference. So we're going to take the quilt and unfold it. And now we parachute it down. As you're parachuting it down, you're going to be looking at the straight lines of the quilt. So I'm looking at this straight line as I'm laying it down. I'm keeping it visually straight. As I look this way to Michelle, I'm trying to keep those edges nice and straight, paying attention to the straight lines of the quilt. Come here, Michelle and I together will do this. And then we'll each go down the end of the quilt. So when I look down this end of the quilt, I want this to be nice and straight. What happens oftentimes is because quilts are not very flat, you're going to have some things that are going to bubble up. This is the most common error that people make when they're basting their quilt. They'll see the excess fabric here and they'll want to push it out to the edges. Do you see what that does to the edge of the quilt? Now the quilt is no longer square. You need to instead keep the straight lines straight. And these excess parts, this little bit of fluff in here, just move it to the middle of the quilt. A quilt is not going to be perfectly flat. It's not a piece of wood. It wouldn't be comfortable to sleep under if it were. So you know that there's going to be texture here, and that's okay. Keep the straight lines straight and move the excess fabric into the middle of the quilt. Next, Michelle and I are going to start pinning the quilt. So we're going to start putting the pins in now. Michelle's going to help me. One thing I want you to know is that when you're placing your pins, place the pins where you don't plan on doing your first quilting. So on this quilt, these straight lines are the first things I'm going to quilt. So I don't want to put a pin on one of those straight lines. I'm going to put a pin in the middle of that section. I also want my pins to be about a hand apart. Not a big, huge hand, just a nice, comfortable hand. So on this quilt, if I put a pin in the middle of each of these squares, it's going to be the perfect distance to hold it all together. And basting a quilt can get long and tedious. So it's always fun to have help from your friends. Karen? It's all done with a little help from my friends. I got this quilt basted in no time. When we come back together next time, we'll be machine quilting our quilt. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. We wouldn't want you to miss a single show. Please share us with your friends and leave a comment. We would really love to hear from you.